So here's my question. So Ken has talked about the 4 faces of truth. And in fact, we have a free PDF on integrallife.com where people can read some of this. In other words, the 4 quadrant conditions that allow us to perceive and communicate truth. In the upper right quadrant, we have objective truth itself, sort of an objective recounting of the facts. And then in the upper left quadrant, we have truthfulness, which determines how much trust we can place in the truth teller. And this is, to get back to sort of the beginning of our conversation, this is where things feel seriously compromised. We don't have a very strong sense of truthfulness when it comes to any of these institutions. And we see sort of the cracks in the foundation that is creating for all of us, I think, sort of globally. And then we have justness in the lower left and functional fit in the lower right, both of which describe essentially what kinds of truth can be and will be selected for by the rest of the collective. And Ken's got a really great quote here, which I'll read. He's talking about lower left justness, but he offers a really great synopsis of all 4, I think. He says, "We are going to have to find ways to recognize and respect the rights of each other and of the community. And these rights cannot be found in objective matter, nor are they simply a case of my own individual sincerity, nor are they a matter of functionally fitting together empirical events. They are rather a matter of fitting our minds together in an intersubjective space that allows each of us to recognize and respect the other, not necessarily agree with each other, but recognize each other, the opposite of which, put simply, is war. We are interested, that is, not only in the truth, not simply in truthfulness, and not merely in functional fit. We are interested in justness, rightness, goodness, and fairness." I love that quote. So I'm curious, how do these 4 faces of truth land for you in your own sort of journalistic practice? And I'm wondering whether you see the same sort of breakdown in all 4 of these quadrants that I see and that we regularly talk about in programs like this.
That's a very good question. I mean, so first thing, maybe, I think that's, so if you take the whole media system as a subsystem of society, I guess this would be the central function of the subsystem, right? So to somehow to shape discourse culture. So, for example, if you watch television debates, and so I don't know how it is in the States, but here it is usually
it's terrible. I'll just say that it's terrible.
Yeah, it's it's usually the expert level discussion culture, I would say. So not even discussion; it's more like a debate, which somehow. I mean, I also researched that a little bit for my book. So I mean, this started more or less with the British parliamentarism some centuries ago, and it somehow got stuck there. So there are, of course, there are always some formats which are more progressive, but I would say the main center of gravity in the discourse culture in mainstream media is still at the expert level. And that means that, so in Germany, a couple of million people, and in the States, maybe a couple of tens of million people are watching this kind of discourse every night on television, and they somehow, of course, they adapt to it. So they think this is like the way I should discuss with people, and so I should win the debate, right? I should be right. And you are wrong. And even if I'm wrong, I will try to hide it with rabbleistic tricks. And
Yep. Always double down, never apologize. Seems to be sort of the par for the course there.
Yeah. And of course, if you have this kind of discourse culture, and which is like reinforced day by day by lots of mass media, then of course you end up in a culture where it's at war.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's well said. And, I think this becomes increasingly important as we move through the stages of development that you're about to take us on, because, I feel like one of the frustration that a lot of people point out is that, sort of reality-based reporting or sort of fact-based reporting isn't always enough, right? To actually create any sort of real cultural resonance. I mean, we often,
Yes.
talk about how you can't reason people out of positions that they didn't reason themselves into in the first place.
Mhm.
So a lot of times when you are sort of leading just with that upper right quadrant, when you're only leading with like, guys, here's the objective facts and they're undeniable, and you can, I'll present them in a falsifiable way, but if you do your research, you'll find that, these are just undeniable objective facts. And then we wonder, why doesn't anyone pay attention to this? Well, the reason they're not paying attention to it is because in the upper left quadrant, there's a perception of your truthfulness. And chances are, if you're on the other side of a political divide, you just sort of have this tribalistic kind of instinctual pushing away or othering of sources of information that don't fit cleanly into your ideology. So automatically you're questioning the truthfulness, which is where we get terms like fake news and things like that. And then we talk about how these things actually get selected for in the lower left quadrant. I mean, if you're the type of person who is, wrapping your worldview around, again, the type of stuff that's coming out of 4chan, for example, just to use the most extreme example, then no amount of, quote, reality-based reporting is going to make even a dent in your worldview, because you're existing in sort of, you're swimming in waters that cannot accept sort of the types of objective truth that are trying to filter through, because you're so committed to a particular narrative or a particular sort of culturally generated sense of mutual understanding that, anything that sort of comes outside of that silo gets instantly rejected. And then in the lower right, we can actually talk about, again, the technological impacts, and how technology actually, in a lot of ways, created these crises and challenges to begin with. I'm thinking back like 20 years ago when the internet, was really starting to kind of hit on all cylinders. And that put, all the print media, for example, into this massive legitimacy crisis. They were hemorrhaging money because they couldn't find enough readership to compensate for all the free, information wants to be free was sort of the standard back then. And this put print media into very, very vulnerable positions, economically, where these massive corporations could come in and just sweep them all up and stack them into a new corporate vertical. And, which is how we get to where we are today, where, a handful of corporations are running the majority of mainstream media that we're exposed to. So we can really see it's all of these 4 quadrants of truth, truthfulness, justness, and functional fit. They're not isolated. They're not sort of separate from each other. They're not mutually exclusive. They all feed back on each other in really, really fascinating and sometimes a little bit terrifying ways. And if you change just one factor in any one of these quadrants, you're changing reality in all the rest of the quadrants.
I mean, I would double down on one thing you said. So about this, so there's this, I mean, there's quite a lot of media professors, at least in Germany, at least that I know of, that are saying that we are in a time of re-economization of mass media. So they already had a time where like the material base was somehow was bigger, was broader. And so they could somehow afford the luxury of having lots of reporters, having lots of experimental formats and so on. And now somehow they need to bootstrap more and more. And that's somehow also being a driver of a regression back to orange. So like,
that makes a lot of sense. Especially as these organizations, again, these classic print organizations now have to compete in a completely different media landscape with all the new sort of selection pressures that come with it. And that's where we get things like, for example, clickbait, like when you start seeing sort of like, the New York Times or the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal or these, really well-known sort of media brands engaging in clickbait. Well, we can understand that somewhat because they're literally competing in the attention economy for clicks because their revenues actually depend on that. And that in turn damages our perception of their truthfulness because it's like, if you were being straight with me, you wouldn't be using clickbait. So it's actually sort of taking them further away from their own goals of gaining more readership in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, so here, I guess this is like a little bit over. So clickbait would be kind of 2019
Yeah.
style. So now it's more like everybody's trying to sell copies, and they are at least focusing again on the long-term relationship of the readerships, and so not how to lure them into a payment model, but also how to keep them inside by giving them
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. So at least, so I'm quite sad that less people are reading my articles, because of course, if they have to pay for it again, then it's
Yeah.
way less people that I can reach. But at the same time, at least they are really like the loyal readership. And but I just said another thing that you mentioned, because you mentioned social media before and
Mhm.
Twitter and this aperspectical. I think that's also, if you put it on the stages of journalism, I think that's also the problem, that most of the content on Twitter is either blue conspiracy theories, or like early orange self-righteousness.
Yep.
So it's just
Yep.
yeah, and that's like, I don't know, 70% of my Twitter feed that I have to read, because I'm somehow
Oh, is that
following
all?
people
Only 70%?
yeah, I mean, because I'm trying to follow very few people, but still, it's, I mean, and this is of course it's even more destructive to our discourse culture, right? And
Yeah.
they're not helping.
They're definitely not, it's
Yeah,
definitely not helping.
yeah,
And, just kind
yeah,
of a cherry on top of that is, I often
yeah.
talk about how these social media platforms are largely being generated by postmodern minds. They're
Yeah,
very much flat
yeah,
postmodern media. Now the difference
yeah,
is with
yeah.
previous forms of media, like when amber media ruled the day, let's say like, a couple centuries ago, it was all centralized. There was one narrative, one approved
Mhm,
narrative, and that was it. And we can talk about all the, sort of the pathologies that come with that. And then with
mhm.
orange, same sort of thing. There was more decentralization, but you still had curators. You still had, your Walter Cronkites or your respected news anchors who were
Yeah.
saying, of all the information out there, here's the information that's more worth paying attention to.
Mhm.
Here's, we're just not going to publish the stuff that's not worth paying attention to. And then comes along Green with, in all of its best interest, just says, let's democratize information, right? Let's get everyone who owns a smartphone
That's true. Yes.
engaged in sort of, these postmodern flat platforms. And of course, these platforms don't have what previous stages had, which was actual mechanisms of enfoldment, where we can tell up from down, truth from, true from false, etc. So the irony here is that amber media creates amber, sort of a space for amber viewership. Orange media creates a space for orange viewership. Green media creates a space where anyone and everyone,
Yeah, it's true.
right, can
Yes.
sort of exaggerate their positions and go
Yeah.
at each other's necks. So it's like, thanks Green for sort of
Yes.
deconstructing all of this. And now I see
Yeah.
this as all as good news, Stefan, because what it does is it leads to conversations like this with you, because these are the life conditions that are calling integral solutions, calling for integral solutions in the first place. And I see
Mm.
that as good news. Like these are all the right problems for us to be dealing with right now. And now it's time for us as integralists to convene and see what kinds of new guardrails we might be able to build
Mm. Mm.
around, these sort of different styles of media.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes.